Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. My name is Adi and today we have another Series 12 team report with another top player. We have Navjit. How you doing?
Good. How are you, man?
I'm doing well. It's great to have you on the channel. For those who don't know you, do you want to tell everyone a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. My name is NJ11 or Navjeet. I've been playing VGC since 2020, around May, and then around the time the circuit went online. And since then, I'd say some of my top personal accomplishments have been finishing top 16 in North America Players Cup 3 and getting carried to NPA 10 by Adi last season and some of our other great team members on the puppies. And aside from that, I'd say uh, some of the other work I've done is mostly on teams, most notably building the base of the eventual Players Cup 3 Global Finals team used by John Evans, and some teams that were used by some players in Players Cup 4 that went 8-1 in the LATAM and Europe region. So, yeah.
Yeah, definitely a newer player who I know I kept hearing about, especially leading into the new NPA season last year, because I kept hearing about you because you kept building these amazing teams and other people kept doing really well with them. And of course, that really culminated in Series 8 when Jonathan Evans managed to win Players Cup with your team. Like you mentioned, Players Cup 4 happened. And of course, today we're talking about a team that you built that kind of fits a similar description. So we're going to talk about the team that you and Kyle Geffner built, which is a Calyrex Groudon team. And Kyle piloted that all the way to top 4 in the Victory Road Series 12 Challenge. You also did very well with the team. You got all the way to top 32, I believe, right down here. And so really, really impressive performance. I think you were the only two piloting the team, and both of you managed to convert into top cut in this massive 500-player event. So do you want to talk about how you built this team?
Yeah, sure. So honestly, a lot of the components came together last minute. Kyle and I were we were actually looking for a team last minute, and we were on call the night before the event trying to put things together. And so Calyrex Groudon came up because it was actually used by a player in one of the week 1 tournaments, I believe, but they were running a more offensive build with an Assault Vest, Thundurus, and a Life Orb Calyrex with Grimmsnarl and Venusaur as the base. It didn't have the Charizard. And so I kind of wanted to take that idea and kind of change it up because I thought the team was personally a little too offensive. And so I personally like to play around really fast damage mitigation. And that's kind of been like a hallmark of a lot of the teams I've built since Series 8. If you recall, Double Weather had Grimmsnarl, had the Yawn Torkoal with Burning Jealousy as well. And that team was also kind of geared towards, really weakening your opponent to try to finish the game up with Kyogre. So similarly, this team used Calyrex with Sash, which wasn't actually too, popular, I don't think. But it had Will-O-Wisp, so it was able to really threaten a lot of the physical attackers that would otherwise really want to lead into this type of team to start stacking like Airstream or Knuckle. And it also used Thundurus, support Thundurus over a more, maybe, I guess, traditional Assault Vest Defiant variant because it offers fast Eerie Impulse, which is really useful for a lot of the special attackers like Kyogre, like Calyrex, and it's also got Thunder Wave, which I mean, and a lot of tricky matchups, Thunder Wave can bail you out. And so that was really the foundation of the team, and those two can really, they kind of bled into the other components of the team where you have Charizard and Groudon, which are really able to capitalize on the way those two can set the board for them in the middle to late game. Groudon can come in on threats that have been burned, that have been, Eerie Impulse down, set up a Sword Stance, generally without too many resources. And similarly for Charizard, it can come in and start stacking Airstreams, start getting up Wildfires without, too much resistance. And so really playing around that fast damage mitigation just to allow your two really offensive Pokemon to capitalize was really kind of like the hallmark of this team.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's Calyrex is, of course, I think one of the Pokemon that everyone looked at at the start, like when this format was introduced, when we got the rule set, as this Pokemon's going to be crazy. This is maybe the best, other than Dacian, maybe the best Pokemon in the format.
Mhm.
And the first couple of weeks, we really didn't see any of it. And so it's cool that you guys found a use for it that wasn't the traditional Life Orb set that we saw in Series 11, or like Choice Spec set that we saw occasionally in Series 10 and 11, and instead really utilized its flexibility. In that it can either play early game where it's clicking Will-O-Wisp, clicking Astral Barrage to weaken Pokemon, or it's still it's this incredible Pokemon with Grimne or with As One where it can come in the late game and kind of take over a game once opponents are weakened. So I think that's a really cool way of approaching it. And I think you guys were also like kind of ahead of the metagame too, because we have seen a lot more Gastrodon recently. And
Yeah.
that's something that you guys were one of the first people to use.
I think, yeah, with Groudon, it naturally made sense to add something, an additional, answer for Rain, right? Because on its own, if you're just bringing Groudon, Charizard, and Thundurus and Calyrex, you can still be a bit susceptible to a well-played Zacian Kyogre. Whereas Gastrodon offers you a lot of flexibility in that matchup with yawn pressure, and just keeping the first kind of turns 1 to 3 a bit more under control, keeping your opponent honest if they want to just go for a turn 1 Dynamax, trying to break this type of team down. You do have that yawn pressure, and especially with the tournament being open team sheet, they have to really respect the options that you have, because you can really punish them with Thundurus and Gastrodon. And I know Kyle didn't run Solar Beam, but I ran Solar Beam on my Charizard to have an additional way to hit things like Seismitoad, hit things like Kyogre really hard, just one-shot them in Sun. And so Gastrodon was really good at keeping those types of Pokemon honest. They wouldn't really want to click Max Geyser as well, right? Because Storm Drain can create a lot of problems for them if Gastrodon switches in and Charizard's left unchecked. And so it ended up being a good natural progression, as well as kind of checking things like Alecki and Thundurus that want to freely click, Max Lightning against it, against a team like this. Double Ground in general has been kind of running around. I know Joe UX9, he won the Limitless tournament using Gastrodon Landorus, and he ended up saying how, good Double Ground ended up being on a more balanced team. So I think it's starting to pick up more usage. Gastrodon, Landorus, Gastrodon with another ground type. It seems really strong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, ground types. Max Quake is such a powerful move, and ground types just hitting Zacian is really important, just because of how common Zacian is. But ground types, of course, inherently weak to Kyogre. And Groudon especially can get caught out of position by Kyogre very easily. So this team having multiple responses to Kyogre does definitely seem really valuable. And I guess so with that, you want to talk about the individual Pokemon, maybe the move sets and the items and the EV spreads and why they are trained like they are.
Sure, yeah. I'll get the easier ones out of the way again. The Calyrex, again, just 252, 252. It just needed to be really fast, and needed to just get to most of the physical attackers before they could move. I know it ended up creating a lot of gravity at Team Preview. I talked to Maddie, who ran a Lunadon team in this tournament, and he actually played Kyle in Swiss. And he said Thundurus, he had a Thundurus with Life Orb, which otherwise would have been really nice in this matchup. But he said because of the Will-O-Wisp and the Sash, he just often hovered over the Thundurus and just wouldn't want to bring it at lead, because if Calyrex led, then it either had that pressure with Astral Barrage on the Lunala, or it just could, just use the Will-O-Wisp and just enable the Charizard or the Groudon in the back. So it was, the Will-O-Wisp tech there was super, super good. And again, Charizard just EV to do the most possible damage and be as fast as possible. So the Thundurus spread and the Groudon spread were Kyle kind of came up with those last minute. So we wanted the Thundurus to bulk a lot of the special hits, so we ended up going with Calm and hitting that first, I think, bump at 121. And we ended up dumping the rest into defense, just for Zacian Calcs with Incineroar, and ran a bit of special attack to get the jump on a couple of bulkier Tornado sets that we were seeing on ladder. So that ended up being nice, that you could do a lot of damage and sometimes even Oko, some of the more bulkier Tornado sets. And Gastrodon, again, we were running Modest. At least I was running Modest for a bit, but we ended up switching to Bold just because most of the times you really needed to get Yawns off. That's really its primary role. It's not there to do a lot of damage with Ice Beam or Earth Power, and most of the times you are going to be considering Dynamaxing Gastrodon. Is probably in a situation where it's accumulated a bunch of Storm Drain boosts. And so we opted for a lot of physical bulk. It could take player offs better from Zacian. It could also sponge some special hits as well because we do have Eerie Impulse. So it ended up being really nice going with the bulk instead of the special attack on a Pokemon like that. It came up a bunch of times in my run where I was able to just narrowly avoid being 2-hit KO'd by a player off and able to get a Yawn off, able to get a Protect up. So that was good. And the Groudon, we ended up running a lot of physical defense on the Groudon because, again, like I mentioned earlier, because the team was so geared around setting Groudon up and in positions where it could set up a Swords Dance and Dynamax, and having Eerie Impulse, the physical defense ended up being really pivotal versus Zacian a lot, because Zacian's otherwise, if you're running a more speed or more attack, you are still threatened a lot by Behemoth Blade. It does a lot, but with this spread, you were able to quite often, at least against Jolly Zacians, you were able to live, I believe, a pair of Behemoth Blades in a pinch and able to KO them back while still, maintaining a little bit of HP. That ended up being really, really nice. There was a bunch of times where I played teams like Yveltal Zacian, Palkia Zacian, where I really needed a Dynamax to Groudon to start getting Quake boosts, and just having that security of not dying to Behemoth Blade plus another attack after Citrus Berry was really, really important for this team to start snowballing in the end game. And Incineroar, we opted for a more especially defensive spread, just because you really want to be taking max Quakes a bit better. We also put the Shuka Berry on there, and being able to absorb a lot of the special attacks in conjunction with having Will-O-Wisp and Intimidate just felt better for overall bulk. And yeah, again, not too much else about the Incineroar. Honestly, it was probably the Pokemon that we tacked on at the end because we were looking for that last slot. It was a Ferrothorn for the longest time in my team builder, and last second, it's such a good blanket check as a Pokemon. You can apply it to so many different matchups just as a cover with Parting Shot and Fake Out that it just ended up being a last minute kind of spread that we added to the team, and it worked as intended for the most part.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. I know that a lot of times I know which 4 Pokemon I'm bringing to some more common matchups, and then there's a few matchups where I only have 3 Pokemon and Incineroar. You can bring it basically whenever you want, so it's nice to have on a team. And of course, it is a really good Pokemon in general, probably the best Pokemon in the game. But I do have some questions about these item choices and maybe some of the moveset choices. So with Incineroar, you did choose to run a Shuka Berry instead of something like a Safety Goggles that we see a lot, or another berry that, another healing berry like a Thingy Berry. And you also chose to run Taunts instead of a Dark move. Can you tell me about those choices?
So I had Taunt on my build for a while. I ended up flip-flopping between Taunt and Throat Chop. And I think in the tournament, I had Throat Chop. I did adjust to Taunt afterwards because I found that I wasn't clicking Throat Chop a lot because of, if you do look, the speed set isn't high enough to a point where you're really outspeeding some of the faster Incineroars. Taunt, again, was really, in testing, it comes up a little bit against Trick Room matchups because Trick Room isn't particularly the best for this team, especially things like Ice Rider, which can generally get their setup really quickly and generally pretty uncontested. But against other teams that are running Porygon 2, for example, Taunt can Porygon 2 and Amoonguss, those teams are susceptible to getting taunted, and having double taunt on this team later on ended up being really nice. Shuka Berry was used because we already had Safety Goggles on the Thundurus. Safety Goggles on Thundurus because we were just bringing Thundurus to more games. Like, for example, if we were playing something like a Palkia Amoonguss Zacian team, like the Thunderous having the safety goggles there, it's just much more important to get around the Amoonguss to get to the Palkia right away than it is for the Incineroar to have a safety goggles there, because it's not really going to be adding a lot to the matchup there. And
Right.
for the other items, because we already had Citrus Berry used up on Groudon, leftovers seemed like the next best thing on Gastrodon to get a bit of passive recovery and protects between dead turns. Life Orb was used on Charizard because, again, we just had to have it do the most possible damage it could, and Sash on Calyrex to increase survivability and being able to have the flexibility as a revenge killer coming in late in games to either clean up as well as kind of stop opposing speed control turn one. If there's a Whimsicott and Calyrex that you're facing down, having the Sash and knowing that you live Astral Barrage and being able to KO a Life Orb variant back was just super, super pivotal, especially in testing the team out in the last couple hours. We ran into a couple Calyrex, and it was just, I couldn't really find a better item than running Focus Sash there.
Mm-hmm. Did you guys have Sash in mind from the beginning, or how did you guys figure that out? Because that's not an item that I had ever seen on Calyrex before this team.
So week one, I'd actually built a Blastoise Calyrex team, and I was running Life Orb on it, and it was just getting one shot over and over again. And so I kind of put the team in the group chat, and Marco Fierro actually responded, and he said, Calyrex with Focus Sash is really good, and no one's using it. And it kind of went glossed over, and I was like, "Well, you're crazy, Marco! Like Life Orb adds so much extra damage. It's a spread move. Like it gets the most out of the spread move." And then, kind of like a week later, I come back and I would wait. Marco's actually right. Focus Sash is really, really good here because you're able to absorb. Essentially, you're able to trade Dynamax, physical Dynamax with a Pokemon like this. Like they would blow a whole 3-turn Dynamax into Calyrex or a Thunderous lead, and you kind of just get a free Will-O-Wisp off, a little bit of chip damage off, and boom, their Dynamax is gone. You've kind of survived all 3 turns, and now it's your turn to kind of snowball with your Pokemon, and it just ended up being such a Swiss Army knife type of Pokemon with the Focus Sash, allowing it to do a bunch of things where it otherwise wouldn't really be able to. You can't really switch into moves, for example, without having the Focus Sash. There's a lot of times in my run where I knew I'm sashed, I can live at 1 HP, and I just know I can get a quick Will-O-Wisp off on the Pokemon. I can get a quick Astral Barrage off, do 20-30%, and then put something in range of an attack later on. And so it allowed me to play more methodically with the team. I wasn't really going for a lot of one-shots myself. I was sometimes, you want to soften things up. You want to put things in range of Wildfire. Sometimes you want to put things in range of a Max Quake, or sometimes even the odd Hailstorm chip, right? So it ended up allowing you to play the team in a slower way, which I really appreciated. And full credit to Marco on that, because he was ahead of all of us with that deck.
Yeah, for sure. And then I think nowadays when I see a Calyrex on ladder, I just kind of assume it's Focus Sash at this point because that is just so common.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so the other thing I've seen recently is that Gastrodon really has a few different moves it wants to run. In particular, I know Joe won his tournament more recently with Recover over Protect. So why did you choose to run Protect?
Protect, I think, is often undervalued in Dynamax formats, primarily because it's such a good tool to stall max out. On a team like this, where you have so many damage mitigation options, as well as Yawn, it becomes really, really useful just to be able to get a Yawn off Protect. And so if you watched Kyle's set, which is actually up on YouTube, he played the only player, I think he went 9-0 with the Zacian and Kyogre team. And so in that set, Kyle just kept clicking Yawn, and like over and over again, he just wouldn't click Protect, but the ever looming threat of just getting a Yawn and a Protect off led to his opponent switching in and out, and had he had Recover, I don't think he wins that set because the opponent had a Rillaboom which could have sniped him with a Grassy Glide at any moment. And having the Protect in a matchup like that where there's a strong Grass Pokemon that's pivoting in on Yawns, it ended up being a huge difference maker. I know in my run, if there was something like a Rillaboom or a Whimsicott that had Energy Ball switching in, I know I played a Kyurem that, one turn it switched in on a Yawn. I was just able to protect instead of getting one shot by a freeze dry or getting one shot by a really strong max move. Whereas I think on Joe's team, because he did have screens, it allowed him a bit more flexibility to run the Recover. I just don't think it would have been a strong option on this team, where sometimes their game plans revolve really heavily around getting a Yawn off and trying to get your offense going from that point forward.
Right. Makes a lot of sense. I also think that, with leftovers, Protect has just added utility because it's now suddenly adding an extra turn of leftovers for free. I've really missed Protect whenever I'm running a leftovers Gastrodon. It's just so hard to justify running Recover on that. But I guess it really does depend on the team.
Yep.
But yeah, I guess the rest of the moves are pretty straightforward. I guess Thundurus probably has some other options. Did you ever consider any other moves on your Thundurus?
So often the slot I think that's usually changing on that Thundurus is the taunt slot. Oftentimes people opt to run something like Rain Dance. Obviously on this team you wouldn't want to run Conflicting Weather. I know some people who were running Thunderwave and Scary Face to get around opposing Thundurus and electric types. But on this team, like I mentioned earlier, playing something like an Amoonguss seems very frustrating. And it seemed very frustrating when theorying the team out. So just having a taunt that could get around Rage Powder seemed to be very, very important to some of the game plans for this team. So I don't think I would run anything else over the taunt slot. The other three moves seem really essential, right? You need the Eerie Impulse, you need at least one attacking move, and Thunderwave again is very good to bail you out, even though it can conflict sometimes with Will-O-Wisp, and Scary Face could potentially be an adjustment that you can make. I found that Thunderwave, especially in a GS format, it can swing a game so quickly if you're able to just get one off and maybe steal a max turn from your opponent. It can really swing momentum, and so that's why I opted for that choice there instead of running maybe something a bit more consistent like Scary Face.
Right. I mean, every turn in this format is so valuable, especially when you're clicking a move with your Zacian or your other restricted. And so just fading a turn is so valuable in GS Cup formats for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And so with that, do you want to talk about your common game plans and how you approach some of the matchups that you expected to see or the matchups that you did actually face?
Sure. Yeah. So when I was looking at kind of like a lot of the week one tournaments that happened, the Nemesis tournament and the USPA Open, I found that a lot of people running either Zacian and Kyogre together, or Zacian and Yveltal seemed like a second, kind of a close second there. And after that, it seemed like Palkia and Zacian. So there's a lot of Zacian plus another restricted that seemed very, very strong. And so this team, so playing against something like Zacian and Kyogre, that was priority number one. Having something that doesn't get bullied by that was important. And so for this team, you have a lot of options. You're able to lead things like Thundurus and Groudon, often being able to click Eerie Impulse right away and start either swapping Gastrodon right away, or depending on what they've led, you can either start pressuring with immediate Sword Stance plus attacks. You're also able to lead. Personally, because with my team I had Solar Beam, I was able to pressure a lot with Thundurus and Charizard early in games, being able to pressure the max overgrowth right away by swapping in the Groudon. It ended up being I ended up using that line in my final round, I believe, to just completely one-shot a Seismitoad with overgrowth, which was really good. But yeah, so a lot of the game plans versus Zacian and Kyogre revolve around using your Thundurus in conjunction with controlling weather and Gastrodon. Those three are super pivotal, and you can kind of adjust the last slot based on what the rest of the team is. If they've got a more offensive grass type like Rillaboom, you might want to position your Charizard for a max, or you can even opt for what Kyle did and bring Incineroar because it combines really well with Fake Out late in the game with Yawn. You can also if that doesn't work out, you can also adjust that last slot with Calyrex because it can start snowballing in end games if you have weakened the opponent with Astral Barrage. But again, the core three there are always Thundurus, Gastrodon, and Groudon, in my opinion. Those three are really, really pivotal there. Versus Yveltal and Zacian, that one was a bit trickier because those teams are a bit more balanced, often running their own Gastrodon and even Rotom Heat, which again, I've also seen a lot of Rotom Heats picking up with Will-O-Wisp, which is can be really annoying for the Groudon, right? So I found the best line into that was leading my own Incineroar and Gastrodon. And, you're able to really set the board with Yawn and Parting Shot right away, get your Charizard or Groudon in a safe position where it can start, either exploiting, a more passive turns from your opponent by either immediately Dynamaxing or starting to get Swords Dances up, and you don't even have to immediately Dynamax with something like Groudon. You can also pressure with Rock Slide and Precipice Blades for a bit. In my top 32, my top cut match, I should say, I played a double Genie Yveltal Zacian team, and the Charizard ended up being super, super pivotal because they also had a support Thundurus, but because I was able to pressure them with Yawn and Parting Shots early in the game, they didn't really have much for the Charizard in the mid game. It was able to come in and Dynamax with Sun Up, and they were often forced into an awkward position of do I max into it right away? Do I try to weaken it with my Yawn Thundurus? Because they did actually need their Thundurus later in the game. And so I found that with Yawn pressure and with Charizard just being really, really strong in that matchup, it's able to, if you're able to position it in a spot where Sun is up and you haven't eaten a Thunder Wave or an Eerie Impulse, you're able to really, really break those teams down really quickly. And so, yeah, and versus Palkia and Zacian, I found that Thundurus again was really, really important. It's really annoying for your opponent if they're running that Palkia. They really need to get rid of that Thundurus immediately because it can be a big nuisance. Being able to get Thunder Waves off on the Zacian, being able to get Eerie Impulses off on Palkia, as well as taunting opposing Amoonguss. I played Ko actually in round 8 of my run, and we were both kind of fighting it out for the our tournament lives at that point. And so in that matchup, the Thundurus actually ended up being quite important. In not as much in game 1, but in game 2, I was able to get Thunder Waves off on some of his Pokemon, and essentially I didn't let him play the game with Thunder Wave. It ended up getting a lot of full paras, and at that point, Groudon and Charizard were able to get in at a point where they could just clean up because Palkia and Zacian really don't want to be in a spot in the end game where they're both paralyzed and facing down powerful spread moves coming out from a Calyrex and Groudon, or even a Dynamax from Charizard. So again, loosely, a lot of the game plans against a lot of the popular teams revolved around using your Thundurus or Gastrodon to Yawn, or even the Calyrex to get Will-O-Wisp off to, again, position Groudon and Charizard to get the most out of your max. If you could dictate the terms of your Dynamax in most of the games, you had a really, really good chance to win those games.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And like you mentioned, you do kind of have to make decisions in team preview, use your best discretion, especially since it is pretty early format, and you're going to see a lot of different variants on different teams and different types of Pokemon in the last couple of slots of a lot of teams. Yep. But I guess in particular, were there any Pokemon that really gave the team trouble, or that you felt like forced your hand into a very linear mode?
Yeah, so I'd say Ice Rider was actually the most problematic matchup for this team. The problem with the Ice Rider matchup is that we don't really have a great way to contest stopping something like Mimikyu, right? Getting up a Trick Room. We could use Calyrex a little bit, but again, Calyrex moves before any of our Mons here. So it's not really getting through the disguise in any capacity. Charizard, I believe, is a role to KO it after the disguise is broken. And even then, if they do have a Kyogre and they do get the weather control, calling that play, you can't really, then you're in a position with the Dynamax Charizard staring down Kyogre in rain, which is in Trick Room, which is not, a board state that you want to be in. And so I fortunately avoided playing any Calyrex Ice Riders. I decided that the team comp was a little too linear. I didn't think people were going to run it as much, but Kyle did actually end up playing 2. He ended up beating both, but the first one he said I believe he was able to play around the Ice Rider, but his second opponent was Animus, and again, Animus is a great opponent, and Kyle did barely manage to win that set off of an Origin Pulse miss, he was telling me. So it can get extremely dicey when you're playing, I guess, Ice Rider, or really any Trick Room team that can get into its offense after setting up Trick Room right away. It's not pleasant. It was also an additional reason why I was experimenting with Taunt, an additional Taunt Pokemon in Incineroar over running something like Throat Chop, because the sometimes Mimikyu was just going to give this team some headaches. Another one I'd say was Kyurem. I actually had to play a Kyurem in this tournament. It was running a Berry, I believe, for Zacian. So that didn't come up, but it was a very frustrating team to play because they had an Assault Vest Kyogre and they had a Kyurem. And so they were just able to layer their restricteds in a way where this team just can't really break that combination. They have that freeze dry to one-shot your Gastrodon, where otherwise you could use Yawn maybe to slow that type of team down, and try to maybe fall back on a general game plan of setting up. You weren't really able to do that. They were also running their own support Thundurus, which made fighting, it made Calyrex trying to get through that much more frustrating. It made positioning Charizard and Sun really, really difficult. And so that was a really bad matchup, I'd say. Calyrex, again, I thought I could maybe try to break them down, but they kept leading Thundurus and Incineroar. I didn't have a great way to really get around Kyogre and Kyurem. That was a very, very difficult matchup. I just got 2-0'd right away, and I wasn't even mad. I just said, I just told my opponent, I hope I don't play you again. Best of luck with everything. It's just a very quick 2-0. I don't even think that set lasted like 20, 25 minutes.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, I mean, you can't cover everything in such a diverse format, and you're always going to run into something that you really can't beat. I can definitely see how Kyurem Kyogre Thundurus, I guess, would be really problematic for this team.
I was just going to say, overall, I think if we did have to pick 2 restricteds to have a bad matchup and do, I will say Kyurem and Calyrex are probably the best ones you could pick, because in the case of at least Kyurem, it's a very inconsistent restricted, right? It requires a lot of support. A lot of the teams are built around Kyurem Dynamaxing, which makes them a bit more linear, a bit more telegraphed. So you still can play around them. It's just situationally that team was a bit bad. But other maybe Kyurem and Zacian teams maybe aren't as bad to play. And versus Ice Rider, I'm sure you've probably seen it yourself playing against it on ladder, but a lot of its game plans are very linear as well. They revolve around using Incineroar or Mimikyu. So at least to some point you can, those types of teams, at least over the course of a best of 3 open team sheet tournament, those teams probably won't cut if you're playing the same linear lines over and over again. I mean, if we do look at some of the usage, we haven't seen too many Calyrex Kyogre teams in too many of the top cuts, and so fortunately we ended up having bad matchups and a couple of restricteds that we didn't really see in top cut, which was very fortunate for us.
Mm-hmm. And that's I feel like that's kind of Calyrex Shadow's problem, is that it does so well in so many Pokemon, but it has some matchups that are so difficult to beat, especially the Tricker matchups where it really is, its biggest asset being its speed is taken away from it. So, but you mentioned a couple interesting games that you played. Of course, Kyle got all the way to top 4. He couldn't join us today, but you can watch his top 16, top 8, and top 4 match all on Victory Road's YouTube channel. They're well archived. Definitely worth a watch. He plays some great opponents all the way. Like in top four, he plays former world champion Paul Ruiz. And you mentioned, that was another matchup that you thought was really difficult because of the taunt Whimsicott. So
Yeah,
if you want to watch Kyle play, this is where you can do it. And then, do you want to tell us a little bit about your Kermit run and some notable matches that you played?
sure. Yeah. So my run, it was again, it wasn't as exciting as Kyle's. That's for sure. He had a roller coaster of matchups and emotions in his run, but my run was relatively straightforward. I played a lot of Zacian and Kyogre as expected. Again, the Kyurem was a bit annoying, but I'd say the highlight games of my run were my top cut match against Xeno VGC, where he was using the Yveltal and Zacian core. That set, I believe he recorded that. I guess that set at least is up somewhere on his YouTube or something. And I'd say my other match that was super memorable was the one I played against Ko. Again, I'd never played him before, so it was definitely nerve wracking playing against a good opponent like that for your tournament life. It was essentially win or go home, and so that matchup again, that was definitely a highlight matchup. We were definitely playing. I think we definitely played some really good games. In that game one, actually, of our set, I'd led Thundurus and Charizard, and I'd kind of just said, he's such a good player. He's not going to expect the turn one Dynamax from Charizard. So I swapped in my Groudon turn one on the Thundurus slot and just went for the Dynamax, and that turn went so horribly. He ended up going for a Spatial Rend on the Groudon, critting it, one-shotting it, and he went for a Thunder Wave on the Charizard slot, and the Charizard got a full para, so that turn was really, really atrocious for me. But I was able to actually come back in that game because, again, Charizard getting a Wildfire up in that game was able to get enough chip damage on everything through a bit of Protect stalling to a point where Calyrex was able to get Astral Barrages off and create a 1v1 situation at the end of the game versus Choice Band or Shifu. And that's where Will-O-Wisp was really, really nice because I could have been timer stalled there had I not gotten a Will-O-Wisp off and started accumulating the damage. So our set there was we traded a lot of interesting turns. Our game one was extremely explosive. And yeah, other than that, my last round I played a Ludicolo Kyogre team, which was interesting to say the least. But yeah, most of the things that the team was built for, and we ended up facing. It didn't really deviate much from the Zacian teams, other than a couple rounds. And so, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, I mean, again, you got all the way to top 32, a really impressive performance. Who did you end up losing to in top cut?
So I lost to Paulo. So I think his name is Juan Benitez. So it's actually the person that Kyle knocked out the following round. So had I, gotten past Paulo, who finished, I think he was the only he's the only 9-0 player in Swiss. Yeah.
Mhm.
So had I gotten past it, actually North and I would have played in top 32. But yeah, his team again. If you watch the set that North played phenomenally. Like he was just he figured out the matchup much quicker than I did. I was struggling to really figure out what he would do. He actually didn't end up bringing Zacian at all, which was very strange. He actually only brought the Kyogre. He ended up opting for his Rillaboom over the Zacian, which made things a little bit complicated. I wasn't expecting that. And so I played in a way where the end game was focused around defeating the Zacian. And when I saw the Rillaboom and I had double ground myself, I'm like, oh, yeah, that's game because I can't stop the grassy glides from really cleaning me up. Whereas when North played him, he was able to use the Calyrex and Incineroar to really get the most out of Gastrodon, whereas I wasn't able to manage my resources as effectively in that matchup. So credits to North, he played that matchup really, really well with the minimal time to prep.
Yeah, I mean, definitely a set worth watching. North played so many fantastic players, and both of you did over the course of the tournament. His happened to be streamed. And so definitely check those out if you want to see this team in action and you want to learn a little bit more about how to use this team. But yeah, those are all the questions I have. Do you have any final words or shout outs that you wanted to give?
Yeah, so huge shout outs to Joe first. Joe was on call with us at last minute. He was kind of he'd actually played this team, not this team exactly, but the team I'd mentioned earlier, the one with the more offensive Calyrex and the Venusaur and the Thunders, and he said that something like that could be interesting, and so it really put us on to kind of building this team out, and running it. So he's really the inspiration for running the Sun Core. Huge shout outs to Marco for recommending Focus Dash Calyrex a couple of weeks in advance. And yeah, huge shout outs to Maddie and Brady for helping us test versus the Zacian and the Kyogre matchup. I played them in a couple of best of threes. They were really good about it. Last minute. Otherwise, it would have been very difficult to theory at least some of the lines heading into the tournament. So, and huge shout outs to North. He was just really, a really good running partner. We were able to support each other between the rounds. I was able to call him a couple times in our breaks, and we were able to check up on each other. So he's just really fun to run the team with. He was very helped me stay calm. I don't know if I helped him that much other than giving him the team, but he helped me. I hadn't played a tournament in about 5.5 months since Players Cup 4, actually. So returning with this tournament, it was really nice to have somebody to kind of keep you calm, especially through 9 rounds of Swiss again. But yeah, that's about it. And shout out to So Hype just because, he's just someone I really look up to. He played Sun in a way where, like, he pushed me to play Sun in a way that's more offensive. Like, I generally tend to be a bit more defensive, a bit more passive, but just watching him play with Charizard, I watched a couple of his replays, and just watching how he likes to be more offensive with his Charizard, I really kind of learned on the fly how to maybe pressure with Charizard in situations where I was being a little too passive within practice. So yeah, huge shout outs to him for that one.
Yeah. Well, I mean, thank you so much for coming on the channel. Again, a really, really impressive run. And I really appreciate you taking the time to share this team that, really slowly starting to creep its way more and more into the metagame, but really just like had some really brand new ideas that people hadn't seen before. And now is starting to have a really big impact on Series 12.
Yeah, no, thanks for
So,
having
yeah.
me on. I've been, again, using your channel as a resource again for a couple of years now. As a newer player, if I need to yoink a spread or figure out a line on the fly, having your team reports as a base is really, really helpful. So I'm just fortunate that I had an opportunity now to come on and talk about, have a team worthy enough to talk about here. So yeah, just thanks for all the work you do, and yeah, it's a blast doing this with you.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And it wouldn't be possible without players like you who are willing to share it. So I really appreciate that too.
Thank you.
But yeah, that's all I got. And until next time, I will see you all later.